Okay, I think we'll make a start. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stuart Black. I'm the chair of this afternoon session. My day job is area manager for Highlands and Islands Enterprise in Murray. That's a picture of very famous bridge at Craigellachie over the River Spey, which is about 5 miles from where I am this afternoon. And very nice to have you all along. I've been on the EDAS board now for 4 years, and it's a great organisation to be part of. And we're always looking for new members. So if you're not a member of EDAS, please visit our website and you'll find out more information on what we do and how to join us. Um, this afternoon, we have a really excellent panel of speakers. We're covering a really pertinent topic, No Community Left Behind. It's the second in our series. First one looked at individuals, and the next one on the 30th of March is going to be looking at making sure no businesses are left behind and what support can be done, provided to small businesses coming out of COVID. Just a wee bit about EDAS. We're the Economic Development Association for Scotland. We're a membership organisation, so we're here to serve members like yourselves. We run a whole lot of events and courses. At the moment, we're reviewing our strategy, and our new strategy has three themes which we think are very pertinent: people, planet, and place. In amongst those, we're looking at things like community wealth building, inclusive business models, youth opportunities, and fair work. We're also looking in the planet theme at net zero, the circular economy, building resilience, and natural capital. And then particularly this afternoon, we're focusing on place. We're looking at regional partnerships and growth deals, land and infrastructure, and really importantly this afternoon, towns, cities, and rural areas. Reflecting on that, we've got a really excellent number of attendees, and I looked at the geography of the attendees. I think the furthest north is Orkney, the furthest south is Northamptonshire, which is great to have someone from down south with us. And then to the west, we have the Western Isles, and then in the east, the furthest east I saw was someone from Curds and Newcastle. Again, very welcome to all of you coming along this afternoon. So without further ado, I'll just run you quickly through the agenda, which is up on the screen now. I've done the introduction. So the first speaker we have is looking at the communities context. Then we have an urban case study, rural communities context, and then a rural case study. And I'll introduce each of the speakers and tell you a little bit about them before we start. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Chris O'Hanlon. Chris is the design and measurement team leader of the Employability Improvement and Design Unit, brackets no one left behind, so very pertinent for today within Scottish Government. Chris has worked on a number of social and economic policy areas, including isolation, which is something I think we're all suffering from a bit in this new way of working, albeit we are able to join things like this from many different places without any particular carbon footprint. And he's also worked with the Scottish National Investment Bank. And for the past 18 months, Chris has been leading it on employability. So a really excellent speaker to kick things off. Chris, over to you. Thanks.
Thanks very much. So we tested this beforehand and everyone should hopefully be able to see this slideshow. I'll just presume that everyone can, considering it worked perfectly first time. Thanks very much for that introduction. I suppose just as a kind of caveat right at the start, when we're talking about communities, particularly within No One Left Behind, but my focus today, we'll be talking about not just geographical communities, but communities of interest and how we can make sure our work to develop the future of employability services wouldn't leave anyone behind. Now, I'm talking in broad strokes here. I've only got 10 minutes, which for some of you who will know me will appreciate is basically impossible for me to say anything in 10 minutes. But I want to just say right at the outset, I recognise and we recognise that there's some really good practice going on out there across organisations and sectors. I can't explore all of this as much as I'd like, but I am really looking forward to hearing some of the speakers a little bit later on in today's session. So before I jump into No One Left Behind specifically, I do think it's worth reflecting on the 2011 Christie Commission as a starting point for some of our thinking today. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this, but if you're not, in this report, Campbell Christie reflected on the opportunities to reform public services, not only through the lens of potentially saving some public money, particularly through the reduction of double handling and preventing disengagement, but crucially for us today, by focusing on the people that require support. And actually, through this focus, we do have an opportunity to have a profound impact in the life of people who are trying to navigate a web of what can be quite complicated public services. I won't dwell too much on No One Left Behind principles. I know that we had a session back in December where Joanne Farrow and Pamela Smith went through this in a wee bit more detail. But just to kind of set the kind of direction for my 10-minute slot today and to kind of refresh memories, I suppose what we're talking about when we talk about the principles of No One Left Behind is the clear direction of travel that we're looking to take around employability in Scotland. As you'll see throughout the kind of the 6 principles here, there are clear links across a number of these to potential communities. So particularly around kind of person-centeredness and user experience, which is particularly pertinent when we're talking about communities of interest. But there's also elements here around services being more straightforward for people to navigate and for a better integration and alignment to take place with other services, which of course has quite a significant impact from the kind of local level and how services are delivered in communities. So although this is an important point, these principles aren't necessarily easy to achieve, particularly from a public sector standpoint, given the way we've historically funded interventions with quite narrow focuses, but they are necessary to ensure that actually services are more effective at supporting users to achieve their end goal. In this case, move towards work, but ultimately make sure that we're not leaving people behind. We built in these commitments a few months later in the review of employability services, where we set out a wider commitment to embedding continuous improvement, collaboration and design thinking. But the reason I really wanted to highlight this today is the kind of direction of travel that this kind of relatively short quote sets. So collaboration is really key to what we're looking to achieve within No One Left Behind, and that's both at a national level but also at a local level. And ultimately, those using provision and the people who are delivering that provision are the key people to determine how effective the system should be. Where we require more thought, however, is around the element of design thinking and how we actually embed some of this, which I'll come on to in just a moment. But traditional approaches such as wide consultation around public policy quite often miss the mark in my experience. And although public consultation is much more ingrained in how the public sector usually approach our work, it doesn't sit particularly well with user-led design. So what I'll come on to kind of mention a little bit is actually involving people who live in our communities within the design of services at the outset is really important. Not only to make sure we're not making assumptions or working from assumptions, but also to build a bit of buy-in and a bit of kind of democratic ownership over public services. And then kind of final caveat before I come into a bit more detail, when I mention users today, I'm primarily talking about service users, so people who engage with our services. But from the kind of Scottish Government and national partnership point of view, we do consider providers and employers to be users of the employability system too. It's a relatively broad term that we use to talk about a broad range of people, but I'll be primarily focusing on service users for the purpose of today. So I mentioned our commitment to design thinking, collaboration and improvement. And in drawing these 3 areas together, we've committed to adapting and adopting the Scottish approach to service design. And the reason we've done this is because it pulls all these commitments and principles together into a coherent kind of way of thinking and a way of talking about this. So broadly speaking, the Scottish approach to service design encourages us to design services with the people who will use them, not for the people that will use them. And that's quite an important distinction, although it is relatively minor perhaps. But what we're talking about here is starting with exploring the problem space openly with users and avoiding the temptations to dive straight into solutions, which particularly for myself from the kind of public sector background that I'm from is quite difficult. You do tend to jump straight into solution mode, or at least I do. But actually that kind of first step of properly exploring the problems that people face in our communities is a really important one. It also fits directly with the Christie Commission, and particularly the focus around empowering people and engaging citizens that Christie's Commission kind of brought out. The Scottish approach to service design also has the benefit of being a collaborative endeavour, so working to create a shared approach to designing services across organisations and sectors. So this isn't employability specific. And when you consider the barriers to employment that people experience, it becomes much easier to appreciate the importance of cross-organisational and cross-sectoral working. So having a shared language and understanding of what we mean when we talk about service design will be a significant benefit in the longer term as we move forward with this agenda, but it is just the first step. It kind of leaves all the hard stuff still to be done. And as I said, right at the outset, to be clear, we're not suggesting no one currently implements design thinking in their work. We know that most service providers will to a certain extent, even if they call it something different. However, as I said, having one really effective part of the system that is really embedded in this might not necessarily have the impact that we're looking for. Why is service design important then? And again, when we're bringing this back to the communities and the people that we serve, public services are really complex, and ultimately a public service's sole purpose is to help someone do something. For us, that's find work, but there are a number of different kind of interrelated services that are tied up in that. So the figure on the left here shows what an example of a service journey might look like for someone at present, particularly if this person has a number of barriers to work. As you can see, there's a kind of overarching problem, which, for the example's sake, is finding work, but that's underpinned by a number of different needs. And actually, there's different organisations working to deliver different services or support people with different elements of these needs. And again, when you take this down to the kind of community level, so people who are working with service providers, whether that's through local partnerships, some of this will hopefully resonate with you, but it's a really difficult web for anyone to navigate. And actually, through some of the research that the Office of the Chief Designer undertook, they were finding out that actually, if people don't manage to navigate this successfully, or even do so in a kind of suboptimal way, it's very unlikely that it'll achieve the positive outcomes that they're looking for. So what we need to do, and what the Scottish approach to service design drives us to achieve, is actually moving towards this figure on the right. So a kind of no wrong door approach, for example, to accessing services and supporting people in our communities. The way that we're looking to achieve this through No One Left Behind is via local partnerships, working collectively to find the support people need. But again, this is going to look vastly different depending on the geographical context that this is being put in place in, as well as any demographic differences. So, we're not expecting this to look the same in Moray as it does in Glasgow city centre, for example. There needs to be real flexibility there between what we're looking to do at kind of national level with No One Left Behind and how that's actually put into practice in communities. And the way that I kind of try and sum this up as much as possible is national coherence and local flexibility. And the reason I'm emphasising that "and" piece is because quite often when this is discussed, regardless of the context, it's usually set up as national coherence versus local flexibility. And actually, I don't think that's overly helpful for the kind of partnership space that we're looking to move into. So anyone who was at the first session will remember that one of the key outcomes of No One Left Behind discussed is moving towards a local delivery model that better allows services to meet the needs of users and communities. I'm very aware that I'm running over, so I will wrap up very quickly. But what we're looking to do here is for Scottish Government's role to create the conditions for good services which are designed and delivered locally. So the way that we're looking to do this is through delivering a suite of national products that are co-produced, not only with people who access services, but people who deliver them as well. And the idea being is that these set a very broad, high-level expectation across the country, but creates plenty of space for local areas to best design services that meet the needs, not just of the kind of geographical challenges in their areas, so particularly in more rural areas, but also the demographic makeup of the area in which they are delivering their service. So research is beginning to demonstrate that people facing complex disadvantage are best supported by holistic, personalised and integrated support, which is rooted in local knowledge and aligned with other activity. So in other words, what we need is that figure in the left, this one here, to be representative of service delivery across the country. National alignment is one part of this, but where it will actually have an impact is in the local areas where services are delivered. This will be my last slide. I did have more, but I'm already running significantly over, for which I apologise, Stuart. But in terms of how we consider how all this stuff fits together, this isn't just designing services for the sake of designing services, and actually it needs to link to wider initiatives such as community wealth building, to consider why service design has wider relevance than just improving citizen experience. So, for example, the design of services could be a crucial component in contributing to a range of positive outcomes, not only in relation to the person accessing support, but for the wider community. So supporting those furthest from the labour market, for example, has implications not just for local plans and priorities, but also for wider public policy challenges, such as reducing poverty, improving public health, and reducing recidivism in the justice system. Additionally, designing good services at a local level that secure positive outcomes for people has the potential to support community wealth building in local economies, for example, by working with anchor institutions to lead the way in supporting more inclusive and diverse economies and workplaces. Finally, by my kind of parting shot here, in the event that employability services don't achieve what we collectively want them to achieve through No One Left Behind, and we continue to see diverse communities of interest or kind of physical communities left behind, the potential benefits listed above just simply won't materialise. We won't drive towards achieving public policy aims collectively, and we won't support community wealth building in the kind of wider sense. We simply continue to support most people well and leave some people on the periphery. So with that, I will end there.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris. And you weren't too much over time because we did start a bit late. Okay, our next speaker, and thanks for setting the context, is Greg Robson. Greg is the Senior Manager, Employment and Skills at North Ayrshire Council. I think community wealth building was mentioned in the last talk, and North Ayrshire's been doing a lot of excellent work on that. Greg has a 20-year career in economic development, mainly in local authorities, but he's also worked with COSLA on welfare reform. So Chris, over to you. We'll take questions at the end, by the way, but feel free to use the chat box if you want to take a note. And once we get to the Q&A at the end, we'll look back at some of these. So thanks. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Stuart. I think I kind of view No One Left Behind as almost in two phases already. When it initially came out, I think a lot of us kind of reacted to it and have done certain things, and I think we're reaching a next phase in No One Left Behind, which Chris explained really well. So I wanted to just explain a wee bit about what we've done about No One Left Behind in North Ayrshire. I suppose the first thing I should say is we were doing some of this before No One Left Behind became a thing as such. We were targeting the most disadvantaged people, but it did give us a bit of impetus, I think, to review what we were doing. And for us, a couple of things jumped out in the initial kind of policy documents. One was around the groups that you're targeting, and I think there's some commonality across Scotland in terms of the groups, but I think each area's still got certain groups that might jump out. So to give you an example, around about the same time we were doing an inclusive growth diagnostic for the first time in Scotland, and that highlighted female employment has been a particularly major issue in North Ayrshire. The employment rate of females is about 10% behind the Scottish average. And it also highlighted people with disabilities and health issues and some young people as well. So that gives us a bit of impetus. We kind of already knew most of the groups we wanted to be targeting, but that gave us a bit of extra impetus, particularly around females and parents in particular. I suppose running from that, if you're going to focus on certain groups, the reality is that these groups will not traditionally walk through the door of an employability service unless you intervene in some sort of way. So it led us to focus on certain partnerships. Health and social care partnership and housing jump out as the ones we concentrated on at the time. And as I'm going to explain, we've done a bit of work around justice, care experience, disabilities. Progress with housing has mostly been around Syrian refugees, but we do want to do more with housing in the future. I suppose the most important point of this is what have we learned. And sorry, missed a slide there. I suppose thinking back to this agenda, and I said it's been called No One Left Behind for a few years, but this agenda has been around for a long time in terms of how do we convince non-employability services to refer their clients into employability, and how do you get that warm handover, and how do you get success from that. And my memory from about 10, 15 years ago when we tried to do this is that you would go in and have a meeting with the director of health and social care or housing, and everybody would agree that it's a great idea to get people jobs, and it's, you know, it should be a joint aim. It tended to lead to short-lived wins in my experience. You know, you would get a wee burst of referrals as the director maybe sent out a message to his own staff. There was issues around data sharing. There was issues around lack of understanding of when somebody was ready to start an employability journey, and realism about, you know, who was right for that employability pipeline. And eventually, my experience was that it just eventually lost impetus, and referral numbers went backward with that kind of top-down approach to it, and almost trying to ask favours of other departments in terms of referring people in. So that was my experience 10 to 15 years ago, but I think it has got a lot better since. What we've done recently in North Ayrshire, a couple of examples, we've funded criminal justice mentors and a through care employability workers through our ESF Poverty Social Inclusion programme. And there's always a kind of decision to be taken when we're doing those types of things of, do we recruit them into our own team, do we contract it out, or do we let them sit in another service? And we decided on this occasion to embed them in a social work team, and we did joint recruitment with social work to get the type of person we want. But these workers still have good links to the employability team, although on a day-to-day basis they're sitting beside social workers. They do have good links to my team, and they also have good links to the pipeline, which I think relates back to some of what Chris was saying in terms of how you provide this more holistic provision. So those posts have worked really well, and we think a big deal of that is because they're embedded in social work teams. We Work for Families is another kind of example of what we've done. Again, very much driven by that aspect of females so often being left behind in North Ayrshire, and parents, particularly the links to child poverty, made us want to do something around that. Probably the big story in the first year of that programme was that health visitors actually referred in, and that's again something I've had a go at many times over the years, whether it's GPs or other bits of the health service, and not always got there, and for it to maintain. But health visitors absolutely bought into the project, and the referral numbers were strong from the start and have kept going. So that was an important win for us, I suppose, in that. It's very much a whole person approach, which again Chris referred to. I think we're one of the areas that does design thinking without calling it that or writing it down necessarily sometimes. I think we think that way, but we've not necessarily formalised it. And one of the other terms which I thought was really important, this term trusted friend came out in one of our feedback sessions with the parents that go through this project. And it's a really interesting term, because we normally in this agenda talk about trusted professional or trusted intermediary, but the client actually said to us, I'm surrounded by trusted professionals. It's actually a trusted friend I need. So I thought that was really interesting, because we always talk about trusted professionals. But in terms of being that trusted friend, that extends to home visits, you know, meeting wherever they want, just at a less formal kind of key worker role than maybe we're used to. What have we learned? I suppose that the first one actually is perhaps destroys my ego, because in my approach to these things before has always been, right, I'll get a meeting with the director and we'll get it all sorted, and then it'll feed down. That didn't happen in this case. It actually went the other way round. If my officers got on with that stuff, they didn't need permission to do it, and officers in health and social care got on with stuff and didn't need permission to do it. We didn't have big senior meetings to agree these things, mostly because there was a big turnover in our health and social care partnership, and we couldn't, you know, get relationships built at that time. But I suppose my lesson from that is senior level buy-in's fine, and you know, if you can get it, great. But actually, it's the people on the ground that you need to convince to refer in. and you know, unless you now work in a really autocratic organisation, you know, you really need the people on the ground, the middle managers and the key workers to buy in, to be able to get those referrals through. I think I've obviously mentioned that trusted friend model. I think that's an important one for Employability World to think about. It's certainly made me think about how we do person specs for jobs and what type of experience we look for from people. So I think that's really important moving forward. I think to allow them to do that kind of thing, they need to be properly resourced and supported and given autonomy to do it. It's almost that given permission to do their job in a different way, to go that extra mile when it might not look anything like employability work, but you're doing what a friend would do for them essentially. So I think there's something around that and how we manage those services. It is a whole person approach, but our aim is to get people to take ownership of that, and to do that you need key workers that believe in their clients. And again, I think that's back to how we maybe recruit key workers in the future. There's maybe something around that. Again, one of the bits of advice I would say is begin with small numbers to establish the service, build profile and trust the referrers. It's a lot easier as a manager to see what's working and what isn't when you start small in these things. And my final point in this slide is don't stress about traditional employability outcomes such as jobs and training, and there's probably some contractors in the room that'll laugh at that. It's not often we get the chance to do that, but the Poverty and Social Inclusion funding stream was a bit more able to do that. So we can't always do that, but I think there is a lesson for funders around there that the job outcomes in our experience with these programmes come, but they take a while longer, and they need the key worker to be the right person for them so that they can see a future for themselves. So what have we learned? We think post-embedded and social work teams can work very well. We think it means that the employability worker gets more of a chance to be trusted within that. Sitting next to somebody, speaking to them on a daily basis definitely helps. It gets over problems of data sharing, to be quite honest. Our criminal justice mentors get access to information and intelligence on people that they wouldn't do if they were sitting outside the council or sitting in my team probably. And they really get a chance to develop expert knowledge, which when it comes to social work clients, and I think is really important. I think it's vital these services are embedded in the pipeline, and that I suppose it's been our job to make sure that happens. It's back to that thing Chris is saying, is one organisation can't do everything within this, so it's about how we organise these services to work together for the eventual solution and work with the client for to develop that solution. So really important they're embedded. Finally, we still think the groups we're talking about, the No One Left Behind groups in general, probably need a helping hand in the jobs market. Therefore, some of the stuff we've done is around ring-fenced MA places for care experienced and disabled. A few HR issues to overcome in that one, but we got there eventually. We run Skills for Life, which is a kind of 6-month paid opportunity for lone parents in the council, and about 85% are get permanent jobs in the council, so that's been very successful. We think the areas that we've got this year, next year, probably we'll be able to spend some of that in older people, but we don't have enough to just make it a blanket offer to the private sector. If we've got a wage subsidy worth £4,000, we know demand would outstrip supply, so we're going to focus our areas in older people on the No One Left Behind kind of groups. But we're doing a big review of our community benefits at the moment, and we're looking at whether we can be more specific around that. Now, there's always a tension between the legislation around procurement and procurement managers and employability leads that kind of want to change the world with procurement. So we'll see how far we get in that, but I would like to be able to be a wee bit more specific in community benefits and not just ask companies to recruit openly and fairly, but ask if they can recruit openly and fairly from within a pot that we choose of our priority clients. So final point I would say is, I think not everything we have done has worked perfectly by any manner of means, but one thing we have discovered over the last few years is that the demand is definitely out there. If you get the service working well, particular services I'm talking about, we've had to expand several times, so the demand's definitely there. I think quality of staff is absolutely vital, and I don't think we've done enough thinking about that. We've had a few instances where we've just been really really lucky that the people we've got in fit that new kind of trusted friend model that I spoke about. But I would admit that it was probably more luck than any grand plan. So I think we actually need to start to look about the person spec that we're asking people to come into this industry from. And finally, still much more to do in North Ayrshire. You know, I've mentioned some stuff that we think's worked quite well over the years, but I'm well aware we have done nothing with the kind of alcohol and drugs group, and we've not done a huge amount with housing as well. So there's a lot to do in terms of that for us in the future. But I hope that gives a flavour of some of the stuff that we think is working reasonably well and why.
Okay, thanks very much, Greg, and really interesting work there, particularly having your staff embedded in social work. That's a really interesting idea. Okay, we're going to move to a more rural context now then, and our next speaker is Alex Stewart. Alex is leading on South of Scotland Enterprises work on communities and social enterprises. SOSI have just joined EDAS as a corporate member, so thanks very much to all of the people in SOSI who made that happen. She's worked in a number of social enterprise organisations and also for Social Enterprise Scotland. So Alex, over to you. Very welcome this afternoon.
Thanks, Stuart, and hi everyone. And I'll share my slides and then I'll turn my camera off if that's okay. Internet's not great here today. I think it's because it's windy in the Borders and that always seems to affect my internet. So hopefully we'll be okay. Is that coming up okay?
Yes, we can see it, Alex.
Great, perfect. Oh, I can't seem to be able to put it on full screen.
Yeah, that's it now. Oh, it was.
Sorry. Just I've got some notes on another page, so I might just make it. Is that big enough? Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Great. Okay. So just to give a bit of rural context to discussion, wanted to cover three areas today, and apologies in advance for my wordy slides. Definitely not as beautiful as Christopher's. But just wanted to cover very briefly some of the challenges we face in the South that link to employability, but also touch on some of our existing strengths as a region, and then just to, at the end, give you a bit of an introduction to South of Scotland Enterprise, our new agency, and what our role might be in this space. Just to talk through some of the challenges we face as a rural region, and these challenges, I suppose some of them will be common across the rural areas of Scotland, but some perhaps a bit more unique to the south. Overall, we've got some pretty big challenges for our economy and our labour market, including forecast jobs decline over the next 10 years. And I suppose going with that, a real need, a real kind of urgency to grow our economy, to create those jobs, to bring those jobs back, but also to support the prosperity and well-being of our region and our communities and people across the south. But growing our economy is a challenge in itself. We're primarily a region of small and micro businesses. I can't remember the exact figure, but I think it's about 75% of our business base is small and micro businesses and organisations, including the third sector, I should say, who can sometimes have a low appetite for risk and expansion, or also, areas to that expansion. Then coupled with that, there's also the challenge of ensuring that when we do create opportunities, that skills are available that match those needs. And at the moment, we are facing some skills challenges. There are, certain areas of skills that aren't available and could become even scarcer. We've got skills shortages across a range of areas. I think the latest figures, although they're from a couple of years ago, show that around 30% of employers across the South reported skill shortages, and we also know that employers identify that employability skills are really critical. We've also got big demographic challenges in the South, and I promise my next slides are less focused on the challenges and a bit more positive than this. We've got some demographic challenges, including a declining working age population as our population gets older, and young people are moving away from the region to work or study, and maybe not coming back immediately or coming back at all. And also, I suppose, from more of a communities perspective and a people perspective, a couple of key things that can put our people in our communities in vulnerable positions. Some of our communities, our geographic communities, are reliant on major employers, and that can pose quite a big risk. And some of the key sectors of work in the South, like hospitality and tourism, agriculture, are characterised by seasonal and part-time working, which can also put people in those industries in vulnerable. And then I suppose in terms of some challenges around the provision and uptake of skills and employability services, I'm sure these challenges will be familiar to people on the call today. In rural areas, the cost of delivery for providers can be higher than in urban areas, for example, because of lower demand for courses. So you're still putting on the course, but you get 5 rather than an oversubscribed course. The cost, I suppose there's costs and management implications for our small businesses and third sector organisations. Can they afford to support training provision or manage a full modern apprenticeship, for example? Or, because of what I mentioned in terms of seasonal and part-time nature of staff, maybe some organisations don't see the value in providing these kind of training and employability pathways. And there's also, I suppose, a range of barriers for individuals as well. So not just on the provision and the employer side, but for individuals as well in accessing education and training or employment. And those can include cost barriers, time barriers, and typical for rural areas, I suppose, digital connectivity and of course, and I probably went a bit over the top with my 3 exclamation marks down there, but of course all this has been exacerbated by COVID, the same way as challenges will have been in other areas. Just to talk about some of our existing strengths as a region, we've already got some key strengths that will help us tackle some of the challenges I just talked through. There's already a real focus on partnership working, which I think, as Christopher was saying, speaks really clearly and aligns really clearly to the No One Left Behind agenda. Our local employability partnerships in both the Scottish Borders and Dumfries and Galloway are strong and proactive, and certainly focused on having all relevant parties around the table so that they can create that single direction. They're also focused on continuous improvement and in strengthening of their partnership working and their provision. And I was chatting to a colleague who's part of the Dumfries and Galloway Employability Partnership, and she was mentioning that they're actually in the early days of using the Scottish approach to service design to think through how they take their provision forward and how they engage service users in the way that we were talking about. We're also looking at greater collaboration, not just at the local authority level, but at the regional level, so across both local authorities, including through the South of Scotland Regional Economic Partnership that was set up relatively recently, I think at the start of last year. So that Regional Economic Partnership brings together a whole range of partners across the South, and will set the direction for all of us as partners for our regional economy, which will then help shape the work of each of the partners and also what we do collaboratively. And that regional economic partnership has a really strong and particular focus on learning and skills, including updating the regional skills investment plan for the South, implementation of that plan. Other key strengths that we see in the South, and it kind of links to what others have already been saying. So, our local partners really know what's happening on the ground. That means that they can see what's needed and they can react quickly to local issues, which is definitely key to a person-centered approach. And since I suppose I come from a communities and third sector and social enterprise hat in SOSE, I should probably also say that there's a really strong role played by our community and third sector organisations in employability, both in terms of provision, but also employment, but also volunteering as well as a pathway for employability. Across the South, we've got a particular focus on young people, including care experience young people, and also an emphasis on work-based learning and how that supports employability. And at the moment, we're starting to do some work that looks at kind of exploring and testing new models that overcome some of those rural challenges that I mentioned earlier, apprenticeships rather than an apprentice with a single organisation to help address some of those barriers faced by our small businesses and our community organisations. So that's some work that's just kicked off with SDS. And I'm probably starting to run over time as well, so I plan to sort of briefly talk through a bit of a case study of our Growing Rural Talent programme, but just to say that there's some really good examples of programmes that have been happening over the last couple of years where a range of partners have come together to bridge the gap between what industry needs and what education and training is available, and to offer combined kind of classroom and work placements that seem to be both meeting the skills needs of some of our key industries in the South, and also providing pathways for people that need them. Finally, just really quickly on South of Scotland Enterprise. So we launched on the 1st of April last year, so that means we're now nearly a year old, which is wild. And most of us have never met our colleagues or been able to get out and about to meet any businesses or communities in the South of Scotland. So really hoping to be able to do that soon. South of Scotland Enterprise is driven by our Act, which gives us a really clear mandate, which I think is brilliant, to jointly focus, to have a really integrated focus on not just economic, but also social and environmental development of the region. So really thinking about how economic growth can be inclusive. Our Act gives us some examples of the types of activities that we could get involved in to deliver that mandate, which you can see on my slide here, are very relevant to this discussion and touch on things like enhancing skills relevant to employment and safeguarding employment. So far, I suppose it's quite early days for SOSE. We're still kind of shaping and developing our organisation and what we're here for. So we've been really focused on engaging with partners and engaging relevant forums to understand the kind of skills employability landscape and where we can add value, focusing on not wanting to duplicate the work that's already going on the ground, where we can add value and help address some of the gaps, and also a focus on building relationships with business and communities, so that we can start to understand their opportunities and challenges, and we hope that one of our roles can be to to share this intelligence with relevant forums and partnerships in future. And finally, as I suppose, as an economic development agency, we've got a really clear goal to grow the economy and to create those jobs that we saw from the challenges earlier are really needed, which we've started to do already this year through our direct support. We've supported around 3,000 jobs this year, and obviously hope to really grow that number and continue to see that number growing in the future, and also making sure that those jobs are, fair work jobs, inclusive jobs, and in the right places across the South as well. That's me. Sorry, I've probably gone over time as well, Stuart.
No, that's fine, Alex. Thanks very much, and your broadband held up, which is always good. Well, our next and final speaker is Ollie Giles. Ollie's the development manager at Tomintoul and Glenlivet Development Trust. Ollie's got a background in community development, and he joined from the Huntly Development Trust in 2015. So without further ado, over to you, Ollie. Thanks.
Thank you, Stuart, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm conscious that I'm eating into your valuable discussion time here, so I will keep this as brief as possible. And I'm going to present a bit of a rural case study in terms of Tomintoul and Glenlivet Development Trust. So if I could have the next slide, please. Bit of geography first, and there is a sort of a wider point to this slide. You'll see there that we're in the northeast of Scotland, within the Moray Council area. We're sort of in that that sort of lower leg foot area of Moray. The yellow line through the centre of that lower part is the Cairngorm National Park Authority boundary, and we also sit within the Crown Estate, Glenlivet Estate area as well. So quite a complex statutory agency landscape that we operate in. And next slide, please. A bit of background to the Development Trust and to Tomintoul and Glenlivet. The Development Trust was formed in 2012, so I'm trying to condense sort of 9 years worth of activity and work here into 10 minutes or so. But Tomintoul and Glenlivet always has been engaged in active community. We've got a high percentage of self-employed people in the tourism and hospitality industry. Agriculture is a key industry as well, so a really strong connection to the land. Our area was identified as fragile, and we have a fragile economy because it's so dependent on tourism. But there was enormous potential for growth in our area as well, and unlike other areas of the national park, areas such as Glenmore and Glenmick, we don't have this sort of visitor pressure, and the area is very well managed for visitors by the Crown Estate. So, there was seen to be huge potential for growth in our area as well. So we were fortunate enough to become an account managed community, and that gave us access to support and funding that otherwise wouldn't have been there. And that was through the Highlands and Islands Enterprise account management process. We've been really lucky to have the same account manager for 9 years, and that's been a huge benefit to us, and something that we've really benefited from. I talked about having a progressive and engaged landowner. In the north of Scotland, that's quite unusual, and is something that we've really benefited from. The Crown Estate obviously has transferred to Scottish Government. Control of the Crown Estate in Scotland has passed the Scottish Government. So we have a very progressive and engaged landowner, and that's really helped when it comes to forming partnerships and working on landscape style projects. Next slide, please. So moving on to a bit more about the detail of the trust. Our vision is for a vibrant and sustainable community, providing opportunities for employment, enterprise and cultural regeneration that can support infrastructure necessary for a quality way of life. So that's come out of our Community Development Plan 2018-2022. And there are some sort of key principles underpinning that vision. The first of which is that we're community led. So we're like yourselves, we're an open membership organisation, and the members sit on the board and control the organisation. So we're community led and community controlled, and that's really important to everything we do. We talked a bit already this afternoon about social enterprise, and right from the start, the trust had a very strong social enterprise ethos, and it took on very early on in its development. It took on management of a couple of key assets in our area, key income generating assets, and operated those through a sort of social enterprise model, where one was supporting surpluses generated at one asset, supporting a small loss made at another asset. Inter-area quality is a big underlining principle for the Development Trust. We are Tom and Towel and Glenlivet Development Trust, and those two areas are distinctive communities and have their own challenges. So we, as a Development Trust representing both communities, we try and work on community cohesion across our area. We also work in partnership. We've sort of talked a bit about partnership already this afternoon, and yeah, partnership has underpinned everything that a lot of my personal career development, and it underpins a lot of what the trust does. You know, we're a small organisation, and working in partnership with other organisations helps us exponentially grow our impact. And similarly, accepting help and support. You know, we do work in a very supportive environment. You know, it's quite a complex environment when you think of the TSIs and the likes of Just Enterprise, but there is a lot of help and support out there. It's quite a complex landscape to navigate sometimes, but the help and support is there. And next slide. So moving on to our projects, I suppose that's a sort of chronological whistle-stop tour through our sort of key strategic projects. As I said, the area was identified as fragile and is very reliant on visitor economy. So events were seen as a sort of key early strategy to encourage repeat visits and make our community a really great place to come and visit. Then we got involved in community enterprise through the hostel and the museum. Just to show that not everything went swimmingly, we also got involved in broadband, and you know, like many rural areas, broadband's a huge issue in our community, and it still is. We managed to develop a pilot project, which I'm very proud of, but we never quite managed to roll it out beyond being just a pilot. And then we got involved in community asset transfers. The hostel and the museum were transferred from Murray Council, and that really underpinned a lot of the next project that we were involved in, which was Tom Towel and Glenlivet Landscape Partnership, a sort of big HLF funded landscape partnership program, which covered 3 years. Development Trust had 3 staff and 3 big projects within the landscape partnership. So we had a fairly substantial seat at that partnership table, which included lots of other sort of big statutory agencies such as the Crown Estate, Cairngorm National Park Authority, etc. So it really sort of forced us to up our game a bit when we accepted that seat in that partnership, and that's given us the confidence to go on and develop and deliver our own affordable housing projects, which is a 12-unit affordable housing development on the site of a former secondary school in Tom and Towel. This includes some low carbon energy systems and some live work units as well. So despite it being developed pre-COVID, it's actually responding to some of the issues that come out of the COVID crisis. So yeah, next slide, please. So I talked just previously about our events, and events are something that we're still heavily involved in. They make our area more vibrant and a better place to live and work. They're hard work to deliver, but ultimately they work well for us. And there's a sort of selection of some of the events that we're involved in, from sort of providing high teas to scary ball gigs. So a real diversity within our events program. Next slide, please. And our physical assets are something that we're incredibly proud of, and something that really supports our community. So we've got the Discovery Centre, which is effectively a visitor centre, and a hostel but on top of that, we've got some office space and a campsite as well. So we've taken sort of two assets and really built on them and developed them. And I think that's one of the sort of key impacts that we've had is on those two assets on our community. Okay, next slide, please. And I talked a bit about the housing project, and that's an architect's impression of the project, and the school site up in the top left-hand corner, top right-hand corner there. Work started on the ground, and we're hoping to be complete in May 2022 and be letting those houses out and selling some of them. Next slide, please. So this is about people and place. So I thought I'd just take a moment to celebrate our people, and the main people involved in the Development Trust are obviously our board and our members, but we also rely heavily on volunteers, and we have some great staff and some really wonderful partners as well. So next slide, please. And yeah, that just illustrates some of what I'm talking about. So some repetition with events there, but ultimately, you know, our people are sort of key to the Development Trust. Next slide. So we summarise our impact in sort of six areas. We have an impact on our visitor economy, and that supports the employment in our area. But through the Landscape Partnership, we've also had an impact on the landscape of our area and the built heritage. We've an awful lot of investment that's gone into the built heritage within Tomintoul and Glenlivet, which is reflected really well in our area. And you know, moving down the scale, community cohesion and our impact on individuals is something that we're really proud of too. So I think I'll leave it there, and you know, we can open the floor and take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, Ollie, thanks again for that presentation, which really brought home the activity that you're doing at the local level. We are a wee bit over time, but if you're willing to stay on with us, are we okay to keep going 5 minutes or so extra? Alison, what do you think?
I think that's fine. I think Alex might need to go.
Yeah. Okay, well, if anyone has any questions, I noticed on the sidebar there was a point made about affordability of provision. So I think a lot of the speakers were talking about individuals, and for employability support, that's obviously key. You know, do people think that the different approaches are going to be affordable? I see a few people leaving. Was one question. Does anyone want to use the hand symbol and ask a question? Everyone's covered it so well in the talks. Yeah, a few people needing to go. I think what I'll do is just try and summarise quickly. I think we had a really excellent suite of presentations there. Chris setting the context very well for the national delivery models, national coherence and local flexibility. Thought that was a really strong point coming through from that. Greg, the work in North Ayrshire is obviously gaining a lot of national and further field coverage as well. So again, thanks for highlighting the work that you were doing there. I thought the work with social work in particular was a really strong point. Alex, thanks for your presentation on what's happening in the south of Scotland. Really pleased to have you as members of EDAS, and challenges there, but also some opportunities. And I think your work around social enterprise is going to be really important there. And that was really what Ollie was highlighting. A lot of this No One Left Behind agenda is met in rural areas by individuals and communities working closely together. Community asset transfer, part of that, but also employment creation and a pride in the community. And I think also Ollie finished on the importance of individuals. So thank you to all of the speakers this afternoon. Thank you to Alison and Ewan for the technical support. Everything worked very well, so appreciate your help on that. Lastly, thanks to all of you for joining. I think that was a really great session. Don't forget the next session's coming up on March the 30th. We'll get more information to you on that if you want on our website. And if you're not a member of EDAS, please consider joining us. We are a membership organisation, and we'd love to have you on board. So thank you for your attention. Have a good afternoon. Goodbye.